read a second time. I call the honourable member for Denison.
Well, good evening, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, in essence, this bill is bad public policy. I don't believe it's supportable, and I won't support it. And I fear I'll be the only person in this chamber who will call out no when the key time comes. I think it's actually quite shameful that this reform is being pushed in this form by the government, and I'm sorry, by the opposition. Now, I do acknowledge, and I respond to the member for Franklin, I see the member for Bass here, I do acknowledge that the Labor Party has fought hard on this issue, but I think you've choked at the last minute. I don't think you should support it, and I'll tell you why. For a start, the no worse off guarantee is only for 8 years. Now, that will be here before we know it. I would have thought that any effective no worse off guarantee would not have a timeline on it. I worry that 8 years is really just to push it beyond the next election, beyond the next parliament. It's just too hard, so we'll park it for a while instead of addressing the fact that there are needs to a need to reform the GST. It clearly is unacceptable that Western Australia, as a result of the trailing nature of the calculations, is only getting roughly about 30 cents in the dollar, I think. So there were needs to fix it, whereas this 8-year no worse off guarantee really just parks it. To me, it reeks of a political fix just to get it beyond the election and a bit beyond that. And I think it's also an attempt to try and condition the community that there will be deep and problematic changes in the future. In fact, Deputy Speaker, you're a military man, you'd understand the term shaping the battlefield, and I think there's an element of this. I also worried that there is no guarantee that the Tasmania's share will grow in line with the inevitable growth in national GST receipts. I mean, of course, the GST pie is always growing, so it's not enough to say we won't be worse off. You know, we would need effective guarantees, and I think it would be very difficult to actually legislate this, but we would need effective, but I'm sure it could be done, some sort of effective guarantee that as the GST pie increases, that Tasmania's gross amount also increases. So I feel that is another significant deficiency in this bill. And I note the member for Franklin spoke about the issue of special purpose payments. I think this is a very serious issue. I think actually, and it's through you, Deputy Speaker, to the member for Franklin, I think this alone is a serious enough deficiency in this bill to warrant the opposition not supporting the bill. I can see it very easily done, and it'd be very hard to actually identify it clearly and to fight against it. That you know, in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time, the end of the forward estimates, our special purpose payments will be reduced. Perhaps subtly, but that could still be tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and that would be very, very harmful. As has been identified in this place, Deputy Speaker, Tasmania has a low domestic tax base and a very high reliance on federal funding in both the GST income and also in special purpose payments. And if we were to see some of those special purpose payments cut or just shaved, it would have a disproportionate impact in Tasmania because of our high and completely understandable reliance on federal funding. Deputy Speaker, can I wrap a bit of context around my concerns? Australia is obviously a federation. You know, when we came together in 1901, the 6 states, the territories, it was agreed then, it was really a condition of federation that all of the states would be equal, would all be treated equal, would all get a fair go. And there's more than a whiff in these reforms of Tasmania being at risk, serious risk, because of the sorts of limitations I've identified, of us being the second-rate state, that there'll be uniformity on the mainland, and then there'll be Tasmania down the bottom having to fight its own fight on its own. I mean, I think this bill today, Deputy Speaker, actually betrays our founding fathers and the architects of federation, because it really does put Tasmania at real risk down the track of being the second-rate state. And it's not like we've got a lack of money, Deputy Speaker. I'd remind honourable members that Australia is the 13th richest country in the world. In fact, if you include Palestine and Taiwan, I think as countries, I think there's something like 196 countries in the world, and we're the 13th richest, fabulously wealthy. And in fact, when you divide our richness our riches across our relatively small population. We're the second wealthiest people on the planet, second only to the Swiss by one measure. In fact, I saw in the Australian newspaper a few days, by another measure, we are the richest people on the planet. So it's not that any state needs to go without. It's not that any state needs to be put at risk of going out in future years because of deficiencies in a reform like this. There is more than enough money, more than enough wealth and smarts in this country to ensure that every state receives the money they genuinely need, and that it is equalised in an effective way to ensure that every person in this country gets access to adequate measures of public health care, to an adequate public education system, and so on. The fact that there may not be enough money sometimes, or it's said that there's not enough money sometimes, is really because politicians make bad decisions and we have our priorities out of whack. I remind you, Deputy Speaker, that the federal budget this year will be in the order of this current financial year is in the order of $500 billion. $500 billion. There's more than enough money with good decision-making and good priorities for every state, and in particular Tasmania, but including Western Australia, where you're from, Deputy Speaker. There's more than enough money that with the right decisions and the right priorities, that every state gets a fair deal. That WA's needs are met, Queensland's needs are met, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. It's not that we have to engineer into our legislation these weaknesses that put us at risk in the future, because there's more than enough money to avoid us being put at risk. And there's been comments too about Tasmania's special needs. It's very real, these concerns to Tasmanians. It is heartening that all Tasmanian senators and members have had a say on this and have all said the right thing, as we need to, because Tasmania does have particular disadvantages and special needs. We're obviously an island state. That it costs money to deliver government services in an island state. We're a small market for the delivery of those services. That creates inefficiencies and often added cost to the delivery of government services as well. We have lower incomes. We're older people. I'll just give you, Deputy Speaker, some insight into the health of Tasmanians. As a general rule, we are less well than mainlanders for some very understandable reasons, and hence the cost of our health care in Tasmania tends to be more than elsewhere. For example, Tasmanians have poorer sight compared with mainlanders, or compared with the national average. We have a higher rate of arthritis compared with the national average, higher rate of hypertension, a markedly higher rate of hypertension actually compared with the national average, higher rate of mental and behavioural problems than the national average, higher rate of back problems, higher rate of deafness, a significantly higher rate of heart, stroke and vascular disease, higher rate of asthma, and in fact in most cancer rates we have the highest rates of any state. In fact, it's all too often that we look at the figures and we are second only to the Northern Territory when it comes to a lot of these measures of public health and economic disadvantage. And I make the point again, Deputy Speaker, at the same time that we have the higher costs of being the island state, we have the higher costs of a more unwell population. We also have a really tiny domestic tax base. We don't have your fabulous iron ore reserves. We don't have the coal of Queensland and New South Wales. We don't have the precious metals. We don't have the uranium of the Northern Territory and South Australia. For a whole lot of reasons, we have a smaller domestic tax base and we have a lot of inefficiencies. So government spending, income from the Commonwealth, and in particular our GST share, in particular our special purpose payments, they assume a disproportionate significance for Tasmania. That helps to explain why all of us, the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, myself, why we are so exercised about this issue. I suppose where I diverge from my colleagues in this place is what I'm going to do about it. And I will vote against this. And if I'm the only member who does vote against it, Deputy Speaker, I'll be asking that my name be recorded in Hansard. Because to my mind, the simple 8-year no worse off guarantee that we won't be worse off. It's a start, but it is not enough to make this bill, Deputy Speaker, supportable. If there was going to be any no worse off guarantee, it should not have had a time limit. 8 years will be here before we know it. The bill is fundamentally deficient in that there's no effective guarantee to ensure that Tasmania's GST share increases proportionally with the increased receipts from GST nationally. And that runs a very real risk that, in effect, we will actually be worse off in the future. And as I've already said, and I'll say it again, Deputy Speaker, that very significant deficiency, that there is no effective guarantee whatsoever that we won't see cuts to our special purpose payments. And this isn't just the member for Franklin raising it to score political points. It's not just me from Denison trying to score political points. I note that an economist, no less than Saul Eslake, one of the most eminent economists in the country, he has made a point of focusing on that risk to Tasmania that we will have cuts to our special purpose payments in the future. So I won't detain the House any longer, Deputy Speaker, other than to say I think this bill is bad public policy. I don't think it's supported. I won't support it, and I am very disappointed that I will not be joined, at least by my colleagues from the Labor Party. It's one thing to voice your concerns, but it's another thing to act. And I think our performance in this place should be measured by what we do, not by what we say. And I am going to be very disappointed to see the ALP support the Liberal and National parties in supporting what I think is bad policy that might not jeopardise Tasmania in the short term, but policy which jeopardises us greatly in the medium and especially the long term. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.